This is David with The Verge, and this is the HTC One. Basically, this phone is HTC's Hail Mary. The company's been in rough shape for a long time, and it's hard to say how many more chances it's going to get to make a real dent in the smartphone market. The One is HTC pulling out all the stops, trying to prove it can really be relevant again. It has some remarkable specs, some impressive features, but how can it compete? So let's start with the hardware. The One is gorgeous, full stop. The One X last year was one of the best designed and best made phones we'd seen, and the One bests it in every way. It's light and thin, but its matte aluminum body still feels really sturdy and strong. The back curves ever so slightly, and the chamfered edges slope down toward the front of the phone, so the whole handset kind of just nestles into your hand. The phone's back and edges are pretty minimalist. They're silver with white accents plus Beats and HTC logos, and there's only one port, a micro USB that doubles as micro HDMI on the bottom. The power button is on top, which is a little awkward to reach on a phone this big, but at least there's a good reason. There's an IR blaster built into the power button, which lets you use your phone to control your TV. The software for doing that isn't great, but it does work, and it's a handy feature to have. There's a little more going on the front of the phone. There are speaker grills on the top and bottom, which both look cool and sound awesome. They create a really nice stereo effect as you hold the phone sideways, and they're a lot louder than most phone speakers.
You think the rules don't apply to you because you disagree with them?
3, 2, 1.
There's some Beats software at work here, and it does make a noticeable difference, though it's basically just adding a low end to whatever you're listening to. But the star of the show here is the 4.7-inch 1080p display in between those speaker grills with tiny black bezels on either side. 1080p displays aren't exactly novel anymore. We've seen similar displays on the Droid DNA, the Sony Xperia Z, and the like. But this one is every bit as good and even a little sharper since it's 4.7 inches instead of 5 like the other devices. Colors are great, text looks fantastic, viewing angles are really good. The screen's not super bright, and it can be tough to use outdoors, but this is otherwise one of the best smartphone displays out there. There are two buttons below the screen flanking an HTC logo. You get home and back, and for some reason there's no multitasking button. That's fine. You just double tap the home button to get to the multitasking menu, and long press to get to Google Now. But the buttons are really awkward to press unless you hold the phone in two hands, just because they're located off to the sides. The One is running Android 4.1.2, which is already outdated software and is missing some of the nice Android 4.2 features. And as always, it's skinned by HTC's Sense software. HTC's toned Sense down a lot over the years, but it's still pretty unmistakable, and HTC has even done some new things in this version. The most obvious new thing here is BlinkFeed, which is basically Flipboard for your home screen. HTC's theory is that you want quick, at-a-glance news on your phone, so it puts a scrolling, customizable news ticker right on your home screen. You pick a bunch of news sources or connect Facebook and Twitter and just watch the news roll in. It works, and it's a fairly handy thing to have, I guess, but it really just feels cluttered and makes using the One kind of exhausting. Plus, without that much work, you could just use Twitter and Flipboard widgets to create an even better system. In settings, you can change it so you have a more normal home screen and then the BlinkFeed setup one screen to the left, and I actually found that was a pretty perfect setup. There are a couple of other quick changes worth making on the phone too. By default, the app drawer only shows 9 apps at a time, which is just a huge waste of space on such a high-res screen. You can make it slightly denser, and you should. You should also sort apps alphabetically, which just makes things easier to find. With some effort, those things work well, but a few things about Sense continue to be kind of a mess. Take the People app, for instance. You can get around by swiping through tabs in the Holo interface, or you can tap on the header to switch, or you can tap on the other header to pick your sources. There are just too many ways to do everything, too many steps and processes you have to remember, and it just gets confusing. There are also a few ugly icons and font choices, which make the One feel like a toy when it's really much more than that otherwise. In a lot of cases, HTC seems to be changing things for the sake of changing things, but one place that's definitely not the case is the camera. Instead of going for more megapixels, the One has what HTC calls an UltraPixel Camera, which is a custom sensor that's essentially a 4-megapixel camera but with much larger pixels. That means in theory that the camera can take in a lot more light at once, and even though you're getting slightly smaller photos, HTC doesn't think you'll care that much. This approach is good and bad. On the plus side, low light performance is excellent. I got shots in low light that the iPhone 5 just couldn't, and this is definitely as versatile in that sense as a camera like the Lumia 920. There's also optical image stabilization, which helps in bad light so the shutter can stay open longer. But the downside is that you get noisier, softer photos. There's a lot of processing happening with each photo, which leads to a lot of softness and sort of mushy photos. And even in great light, photos don't feel particularly sharp. The photos look great at Facebook or Instagram sizes, and in fairness, HTC's betting that's all you want to do, and that's probably accurate. There are a lot of internal filters and settings for the camera, but the coolest one by far is called Zoe. Basically, it takes 1 second of video before you press the camera shutter and 3 seconds after, and then lets you scrub frame by frame through the video to pull out exactly the shot you wanted. It works great and really helps undo the shutter lag problem every smartphone has. The camera's a trade-off. Its photos aren't as sharp as some of its competitors, particularly at larger sizes, but there are a bunch of cool features, and you really can just get shots you couldn't otherwise. The One runs Qualcomm's Snapdragon 600 processor with 2 gigs of RAM, and it's just off the charts. Even intensive games almost never lagged or dropped frames, and except for a few pervasive Android issues like scrolling, which is for some reason still jumpy on every Android device, it's as good as I've seen. It's kind of overkill, honestly, since a quad-core processor is really beyond what you need and what any software is tuned for, and the performance isn't noticeably better than any other high-end phone, but that's obviously not a bad thing, and it does work really well. Call quality and reception are about what you'd expect. Noise cancellation was actually really good on the One, picking up less background noise than the iPhone or other Android phones I tested, but it's not a huge difference. I didn't get to test the LTE version, but this unlocked European model was fast and reliable on AT&T. When you look at the One's spec sheet, from the super fast processor to the big and high-res screen, it seems impossible that the One would get good battery life. And it is impossible. The One will last a full day, but only with really light use and some serious optimization. In more practical use, you're going to want to keep a second charger with you at all times. After I spent about 10 minutes demoting BlinkFeed, fixing the app drawer, and installing a third-party keyboard, I kind of fell in love with the HTC One. Actually, I fell in love with it the moment I took it out of the box, but with a little work it became not only a beautiful phone, but one I could actually use to get work done. There are a handful of things I still hate about Sense, and the battery life is really unfortunate, but I can pretty easily say this is my favorite Android phone yet. Of course, Samsung may have something to say about that with the upcoming Galaxy S4, but as of this moment, the HTC One is the gold standard for Android devices.